So in this last video, I'll show briefly the opportunity to turn the plots that we did for in a static way to make it fully interactive. This is not required for the class, but I think it would be interesting to see, and I'll share the code also on Canvas. So here we run the code as what they call a Jupyter notebook. It's Python running a sequence of cells, so it's very convenient. And so here I'm going to open the Windows environment for the notebooks. And so here the code is now divided in a sequence of cells, and I can execute them one by one. So this is COVID cases interactive, and this is the extension for a notebook, but it's basically Python code wrapped in a sequence of cells. So here, with this triangular run each cell, I'm doing that one at a time. Here I could run them all in sequence, but I think it's nice to see here. This symbol shows that the Bokeh library is able to plot. Here is actually a utility function that we can run it inside the notebook or outside as a web page. It just makes an introspection and check whether it's running in a notebook or not. Now, this is interesting. It's nice that it gives you the time that it runs for each cell. One of those will take a while because you're scraping lots of data on the web. So output inside of the notebook. This is some of the utility function that we already saw. Here now in this, we do typical scraping activity, but now we do this one out of the main web page here of the coronavirus information. And basically what we're going to collect is this list of countries and the population for each of those. And the name of the country not displayed here, but also as a URL, right? So here, when you click, you see US is the extension, although the name here in the display is USA. So for each country, we need to get the display name, the prefix to go to the URL, or suffix is better, and the size of the population to do the normalization factor. And so here we run this. It's going to scrape the main page that before we took a couple of values manually. So here, to make things faster in the demonstration, I'm filtering only for countries where the population is over 50 million people. If you put this filter to 0 or somewhere in between, you will get more data. But obviously this will run longer. So let's say, for example, now after that is run, I look at how many countries have more than 50 million. So it looks like it's 31 based on that table. I don't know if it's a precise number, but relative to that table. And now here we run the main part of the code with the scraping functions that we saw before. This gets overridden by the population actually computed automatically that way. And so here you see it's still running, it's collecting the data for all the nations. I believe it might take about 40 seconds or maybe 26, a little bit faster. But again, depending on how many nations you put there, maybe we'll try later with more. And this is the main app structure with the buttons. So here, let me see. So this is the set of a bunch of components. I'll first show it and then go back to the code. But I think you can recognize the creation of a plot, the x-axis structure, the drawing of the data. You see with the P line and PV area. So effectively, this is the same code with some tweaks because it gets to redrawn on the fly every time we do an update. And then a set of widgets, kind of the buttons to make it changing from cumulative to daily and things like that, or for selecting the nation itself. So here, sometimes there is a problem with the display. We need to make sure that things are available. I have here the solution to this problem, but here, since it uses the web page, you need to have this token enabled. So here, OS environment, and you cut and paste that token here is an example. So we run it here, then I can go back and run the code, and we see the data being displayed. So the difference between this and what we saw before is effectively just in the way the data is updated and is organized. So here we have the daily. So here, first, for example, you see we have a bunch of nation, and here I'm highlighting Brazil, Italy, and the USA as usual. But now we have a single plot, and then I have here two buttons that make me switch between cumulative display and daily display, and you can go back and forth between the two. But then I can decide, what if I want to compare Germany? So here I have a multi-selection panel. So I can do control and I click on Germany and I add that, and you see now there is another plot. India is another one. Generally, so here you have the plots, the colors, and you can decide how many nations you want to compare. Let's say, for example, focus more on Europe. Then I have Germany, Italy, and France. And you see actually how, as European countries, actually they have much more similar profiles, right? They have basically the first wave, very short but very high intensity, a wider one in the middle, and now they're kind of low. But if I replace Germany for France, the variation is not huge, except that you see Italy, so it's kind of lower, Germany is having a spike. And if you listen to the news in Europe, you will notice that, while, for example, France is not having that spike. But then if you add, for example, Mexico, you see it's a different continent, things have arrived later, and you have those three waves. So fairly different profile, both for geographic difference and also because of maybe different way of reacting and so on. So you can look at other countries and make those comparisons. Now, from the perspective of how this is structured, so the code is very similar, except that you have to create some of those buttons and so on. And so, for example, here you have a column where you have the group of radio buttons, and those are basically the daily and the total. So those are called radio buttons because when you select the one, the other gets unselected. So here you have those two radio buttons. It's really one group together, and they select alternating. So you have a column, this on top of this, and then below there is a row where the plot and the multi-selection. The multi-selection, you have the name of the nations. So as we do being interactive, we need to associate for each action what they call a callback function. So you say on change here for the multi-select. Anytime I change, I call this function that set the nations and then draw the data. And so instead of just drawing the data once, then we have to build a function called draw data. So this would be the function that does the plots, but it gets called every time some action happens. And so we have to pass the figure environment, the categories, and so on. And so every time we kind of reset the information, we draw new plots. Now here the plots, instead of being just 2 lines. So we have a depending on how many nations, so instead of 3, depending on how many nations are being selected, that loop through all of those and make a plot for each of those. So here, for example, if I select nothing, a loop through no still makes the environments, and then you can select something new and then go through the data. So this could be more compelling if you don't know yet on what you're focusing on, and then you have to have a large list of things. But at the same time, if you plot all of them on the fly, the plot gets really confusing, not to mention that it's slow, clearly. And so you don't want to have that type of plot altogether, right? I select everything, have a long list, it's not legible anymore. And that's why it's convenient to do maybe 3 or 4 at a time. You have to decide what you're focusing on and so on. And so you need to have this flexibility. So it's not just to kind of make it fancy, but it's actually a convenient way of dealing with lots of data and interactively go through all of that. So I hope this helped thinking in terms of how Bokeh and Python then can be built as a set of capabilities that can have a full user interface, interactivity, while having analysis of plotting of the data. And as usual, notice that this is a Bokeh plot, so you can put something like this on a web page, retaining the ability to do the interactive drawing and selection and so on. And that's the last class. Thank you and good luck for your final.